The training grounds of Outpost Calith 9 stretched beneath twin suns, a vast expanse of red sand and synthetic combat obstacles, where the galaxy's future defenders learned to survive. Saren stood at the center of the arena, her breath steady despite the relentless heat that would have felled most species within minutes. She was human, a fact that still caused whispers among the instructional staff, and she had been assigned to train the newest cohort of Vrelnari cubs. The Vrelnari were a proud warrior race, feline in appearance with fur that shimmered like starlight, and eyes that could track prey across kilometers. Their cubs, however, were small, barely reaching Saren's waist, with oversized ears and paws they had yet to grow into. They looked at her with a mixture of awe and suspicion. These children of a species that had conquered 17 systems before humanity had even achieved faster-than-light travel. Again, Saren called out, her voice carrying across the training ground. "Shield formation, then dispersal pattern Omega-3. The cubs scrambled into position, their movements improving with each repetition. Saren moved between them, correcting stances, adjusting grip positions on their training weapons. The smallest cub, Vex, struggled with the weight of his shield, his thin arms trembling. "Plant your back foot," Saren said, kneeling beside him. "Use your whole body, not just your arms. The strength doesn't come from here." She tapped his shoulder. "It comes from here." She pressed her hand against his core. Vex's golden eyes widened as he adjusted his stance. When he lifted the shield again, it rose smoothly, and a small trill of pride escaped his throat. Saren smiled and stood, turning to address the group. "Now we're going to practice rapid," the sound was sharp, unmistakable, fabric tearing. Saren felt the cool air against her back as her training uniform split along the shoulder blade. The result of one too many demonstrations, one too many combat sequences that pushed the fabric beyond its limits. The tear ran from her shoulder down to her mid-back, exposing the pale skin beneath and the old scar tissue from a mission she rarely discussed. The training ground fell silent. 30 pairs of feline eyes fixed upon her, unblinking. Among the Vrelnari, exposed skin during training was a sign of profound dishonor, a vulnerability that suggested inadequate preparation. Several of the older cubs began to murmur, their ears flattening against their skulls. Instructor Krath, the Vrelnari overseer who observed from the shade structure, rose to his feet, his tail lashing with what Saren recognized as concern. But Saren simply reached back, felt the extent of the damage, and shrugged. "Well, that's inconvenient," she said calmly. "We'll continue. You, frontline, ready positions." The cubs didn't move. They stared at the tear in her uniform, at the vulnerability she displayed with such indifference. How could their instructor continue with such dishonor visible? How could she lead them when she could not even maintain the integrity of her own covering? Vec was the first to break formation. The small cub darted toward the equipment shed with surprising speed, his oversized paws kicking up small clouds of red dust. Saren watched him go, confused, as the other cubs began to shift nervously. When Vec returned, he carried a strip of blue cloth, torn. Saren realized from his own training sash, the one that marked him as a first-cycle student. He approached her slowly, his ears flat but his eyes determined. "Instructor Saren," Vec said in his high, chirping voice. "Please, to cover." Saren knelt, bringing herself to eye level with the cub. "Vec, I don't need—" But Vec was already moving around her, standing on his back legs to reach the tear. His small paws were surprisingly gentle as he pressed the cloth against the gap in her uniform. It didn't stay. He had no way to secure it, but the gesture was clear. And then something remarkable happened. Another cub approached, then another. They came bearing strips of cloth torn from their own sashes, their training wraps, even the decorative bands they wore to honor their clan houses. One by one, the cubs of Cohort 77 surrounded their human instructor, pressing scraps of fabric against the tear in her uniform, trying desperately to cover the vulnerability she seemed so unconcerned about. "We must protect the instructor," a cub named Shayla whispered. "She has protected us." Saren felt an unexpected tightness in her chest. She had trained soldiers across a dozen worlds, had led combat teams through impossible odds. But this simple act from children who barely knew her struck something deep. Instructor Krath approached, his large form casting a shadow across the gathered cubs. Saren expected a reprimand, a lecture about maintaining proper decorum, Instead, the massive Vrelnari knelt and produced a ceremonial sash from his belt, deep crimson, marked with his own combat honors. "The cubs understand what I had doubted," Krath said quietly, his voice a rumbling purr. "They see that you are Pack, Instructor Seren, and Pack does not abandon Pack in vulnerability." He draped the sash across her shoulders, and the cubs secured it in place with their smaller strips, creating a patchwork covering that held the torn fabric together. It was clumsy, uneven, and probably violated 17 uniform regulations. It was also the most honored Seren had ever felt. "Thank you," she said softly, her hand resting on Vec's small head. "All of you." The cubs stepped back, their tails high, their ears forward with pride. They had protected their instructor. They had shown her that even the strongest needed others sometimes. Seren stood, the makeshift repair holding firm, and raised her voice once more. "Now then, shall we continue? Ready positions." The cubs scrambled into formation with renewed energy, and as the training resumed, Instructor Krath returned to his observation post. But his eyes held new respect as he watched the human drive her students harder than before. The patchwork of cloths across her back, a banner of something the Vrelnari were only beginning to understand. Humans called it many things: teamwork, solidarity, mutual aid. But to the cubs of Cohort 77, it would always be remembered as the day they learned that true strength wasn't the absence of vulnerability. It was standing together when vulnerability showed itself. And their instructor, the strange human named Seren who could endure their world's killing heat and still smile, had taught them that lesson without saying a word.